Boeing falling again as troubles mount for the company following the grounding of its 737 MAX planes. Phil LeBeau is in Chicago with all the details. Phil.
And Melissa, Boeing has just announced within the last couple of minutes that it has approved its regular quarterly dividend. That is $2.05. So if you were one of those people who thought, is cash flow a concern? Is there an issue with liquidity down the road for these guys? Hasn't stopped them from approving the same quarterly dividend that we've seen in the past. Today, we did see a number of analyst notes regarding the documents that came out that were leaked out of Capitol Hill on Friday regarding a technical pilot in 2016, his instant messages and emails regarding the 737 MAX flight simulators. In those analyst notes, guys, we saw 3 downgrades. And as those downgrades came out, and there were a lot of analysts who said, stay to the side, the price target for some came down more than $100. But guess what? The consensus right now, it's still $412. So it's still well above where the stock is trading right now. All of the notes center around this one question. Will production drop for the 737 MAX? And when you look at that production, remember, they're at 42 per month right now. The company has told their suppliers they expect to get certification and then ramp up to 52 per month in February, then to go to 57 per month by June. Dennis Muhlenberg out with an employee email out today saying that the company is making steady progress on the return to service for the 737 MAX. By the way, the company still is targeting to have that certification, at least by one of the major regulatory agencies around the world, by the end of this year. As you take a look at shares of Boeing, that is an ugly-looking chart over the last couple of days, but keep this in mind, guys. We will learn more on Wednesday during the analyst call. That'll be the first time we hear from Dennis Muhlenberg in terms of a Q&A situation with analysts and get a better read on where he sees the progress of the company as well as the 737 MAX.
All right, Phil, thank you. Phil LeBeau in Chicago with the very latest on Boeing. Tim, you're a shareholder, so what do you make of these past 2 days?
Well, I'll tell you what, here's the issue. The free cash flow hit is something that I think people should be concerned about, because what we've talked about with this company for the last 18 months that really led it to its peak was all about free cash flow. And you were talking about at its peak in terms of a forward-looking basis, almost $24 a share in free cash flow. So if you listen to the UBS note, they've downgraded 2019 cash flow by $3.5 billion. They've downgraded 2020 by $5 billion. And if you listen to all these analysts, maybe they got a little bit more relaxed, or they were flexible in when they said the MAX would be, essentially production would restart. Most guys were kind of October, November, if you read these guys in the beginning of the summer. So they've been sneaking it into like January, but now they have to address this. And there's no question, I think, the FAA has to slow it down, if for no other reason, until they find out more about this. And I think, therefore, that's going to push back some of these free cash flow numbers even more.
How is the stock, I said it on Friday, how is the stock still positive year to date? To me, if it were, we talked about this, if it was any other stock, it should have been cut in half. And I feel as if people are just saying they'll always be around. It'll always be a duopoly.
The decline is happening pretty fast in the past couple of days.
It has. But we saw back, in March, we saw a decline of 18%. We saw in July a decline of 16%.
Sure.
This one was 14% rapidly. But it's still there. It's still positive year to date. It's mind-boggling to me.
So is that a good sign or a bad sign?
It's a good sign because it's telling you that there's a duopoly in the segment, so that people say, okay, no matter where we go, you got to be someplace, one of the two.
So I was talking to an analyst today on Power Lunch from Melius Research, Carter Copeland. He has a $500 price target on Boeing stock still. And with all this stuff happening, Muhlenberg going to the Hill, et cetera, he said, at the end of the day, it's a duopoly. People have nowhere else to go. I was like, life is good if you're in a duopoly. It's like, certainly is. That is a major reason why he's kept with the $500 price target.
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons, like Facebook for everybody who wants, and it's one of those things I'd love to hate, but you can't because it lives by itself sort of in this world. Boeing to a certain extent as well. I understand what Steve is saying, but it's also down from $446
in January.
In January, February. That's a pretty significant move to the downside, and maybe it's been bolstered by the fact that the S&P 500 is one the whisper of the all-time high. How do you trade the stock here? I think we've been pretty consistent. I mean, I think the December lows are in place. And that low, I think on the 19th, was right around 305. And we've said this. Why in this environment, especially given those headlines on Friday about these instant messages, why pile in ahead of earnings? I don't see your edge at this point.
Yeah, I mean, listen, that that's just a point in time, December 305. Who knows? You know, I mean, what I see from an earnings standpoint is that analysts took out what they were expecting, 10% earnings growth for 2019, and they basically slashed it down 80%, and they moved it to 2020 and 2021. So when you talk about this duopoly, they don't have to buy the 737 MAX, right? There are Airbus comparisons. That's why they started making this plane to catch up to what they had as a single-aisle plane. You know, to me, listen, this is going to get messy for a while. I suspect the CEO will not be the CEO by the end of this year, and you're going to have a long period of time where there's going to be regulatory issues, there's going to be fines, there's going to be mismanagement. The company's going to be very cautious on guidance. So I just don't see the reason. I've said this fairly consistently since that first very sad incident. You know, I think it's important to remember 346 people died in 2 crashes, and that's what it took to ground these planes. So this is going to take longer than people think to come
on our 12:30 conference call today. Guy, you said, are there any instances in history that are comparable to what is going on with Boeing? And I thought that was a good question. And you mentioned,
really,
for once, you had a good point.
Nice job,
you mentioned
buddy.
Exxon Valdez, right? The BP oil spill, things like that. I thought of Wells Fargo, actually.
Yeah. Which, by the way, respectfully, they've screwed the entire thing up now for 2 years.
For years. And the stock has done nothing and underperformed its sector over that same time period. But they had cultural issues, or what people thought were cultural issues. And then they had a regulator breathing down their neck. They had the Fed putting growth caps on them, which is effectively what the FAA can do in terms of the recertification process. What worries, I mean, in terms of the...
Yeah, so, and by the way, I'm
that
flat position, and I flattened out a few weeks ago, and that may sound like convenient. I was ready to jump back into the position last week. I mean, my view was this was a company that around 350 I really wanted to own, and what's different about this, and so all those scenarios you just discussed, you basically have the issue with a regulator, but I think this is even more acute with a regulator. I mean, obviously, Exxon and BP had to deal with a lot of different functions, and it was really more about liability in terms of measuring the damage. And even though they did some horrible things to the earth, I think people were trying to put a dollar number. It's very difficult to put a dollar number on this. And the sense that I have is also that Boeing and the FAA always had a very respectful relationship. And if you feel like that's been tarnished in a way that it's never been before, this will be a bigger problem for the company that we've ever seen.